it's about just allowing this to be a video that we can use if you feel like that might happen for you. Okay, so I'm gonna ask, I saw your picture, Mike. I'm gonna ask that we start out just seated, and I would love for you to plant your feet on the floor. Okay, I don't know why I just echoed. I hope that's not gonna keep going. Okay, so if we get both feet on the ground and they're planted hip width apart, put one hand over your lower belly. So my thumb needs to be somewhere near navel, baby finger toward pubic bone, and then the other hand up in the upper chest. And I'm just going to ask you if you're comfortable to close your eyes, but you could just look down if you would prefer. And while I get Joyce into the room, I want you to start to breathe slowly. So when you're breathing, Joyce, welcome. We're just starting with seated with our feet hip width apart, planted on the ground, one hand over belly and one hand over chest. So when you're inhaling, I really want you to make sure you feel your belly hand move forward away from you and the chest hand. And when you exhale, you just really slowly draw in. Keep going. So ideally, when you inhale, I'm just going to get a couple of people in here. Hello, Kim. Hello. Dave and Lori can't hear me yet. When you inhale, I want it to be to a count of 6 or 8. Hello, Dave and Lori. We're sitting with our feet planted, Kim, and we're just breathing, one hand on belly, one hand on chest. So when you inhale, let it be to a count of about 6 or 8. So you're really slowing it down and making sure that the inhale goes all the way down to the pelvic floor. Hi, Kim. And then when you exhale, ideally you're going to exhale at least 2 counts longer than your inhale, but not to the point where you feel worried about breath. So I just want you to keep going with this for a little while as we get the last few people in. Janice, so glad to see you. If you can sit with your feet flat on the ground, make complete contact with the ground, and we're breathing one hand on belly and one hand on chest. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit while you're doing this breathing practice, because you're going to find out how important the breath is in dealing with anxiety. So inhaling to the pelvic floor, belly expanding. When you exhale, slowly draw the belly in. Hi, Heather. We're going to start with our feet on the ground, seated. Breathing to belly, breathing to chest, one hand on belly so you feel it. So when you inhale to your upper lungs, that's where the receptors sit for your sympathetic nervous system, so your fight or flight. As you take the inhale down towards your lower lungs, you start to trigger your parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic is the one we're supposed to live in. The sympathetic is the one that you're supposed to break in case of emergencies. When you feel your belly expanding, know that that is because the diaphragm is pushing down into your belly. So it's applying pressure to your adrenals, your kidneys, your liver, your spleen. When you exhale, belly slowly toward back, just let yourself ground a little bit through the tailbone. This is not rocket science, super simple. Could you get your exhale to go almost twice as long as your inhale, not creating worry or stress about it, but just go as long as you can. And know that in that elongation of your exhale, now you're starting to trigger your vagus nerve, which is going to get your relaxation response going. Your relaxation response is not how you feel when you walk in the woods or you go for a paddle. Your relaxation response should make you unable to paddle and unable to walk because you're just feeling so sleepy. It takes a while. But the vagus nerve is going to send a serum to your heart and to your nervous system to calm, to soothe, to lower inflammation. So the breath is going to be the thread that we carry through this workshop today. Keep going with it, but maybe place your hands on your thighs now. I should mention too, you have no need to have your video on if you would prefer it off. It was just lovely to see you and make eye contact, but don't feel you have to keep it on. This is for you, not me. So keep those long, slow, deep breaths going. And why don't we just do a couple of head and neck circles, nice and slowly. So we think about anxiety as indigestion of the mind, because the mind is racing too fast. So even when you're doing these circles of head and neck, you want to go really slowly to offset that fast wind. So reverse your circles. Keep going. Lots of deep breathing. You got it. So simple, right? Let your head come back to neutral and just take a really deep breath there, just feeling where you are. I think Linda just joined us. Linda, we're seated and we're just doing some really gentle breathing practices. Take your shoulders up, back as you inhale, down as you exhale, forward. Slow, steady circles with your shoulders. You got it. Now reverse those circles. So just slow, steady, hello body. Okay, let your shoulders rest. Just a couple more. Put your hands on your thighs again. So you've probably heard of cat and cow when you do yoga. You can do that seated. You can do it in your bed. You can do it standing. It doesn't matter. You're just going to, as you exhale, curl your chin to your chest and round your back like a cat who's rounding its back. And then you tilt your tail back and chest forward, and you raise your head up and tilt it slightly back. Inhale. So exhale, round. Inhale, reach. It's okay to be audible when you breathe. Keep going. So our lungs, as we breathe, our lungs store our grief, of which there is a great deal right now. But interestingly, they also store our courage. So the courage to grieve, the courage to be present, the courage to be here. One more. Rounding and arch. Perfect. Come back to center. I want to do one more body movement before I go straight into blither blather. Get your whole body to start to circle. You got it. So inhale through half of the circle. Exhale through the other half. Reverse. So just kind of oiling the body up, just getting stuff moving, getting us back in our bodies, because anxiety is so disassociative, right? We just zoom out of our bodies and we wonder why we trip and fall down or don't know where we are. All right, so come back to center. Just take a couple of deep breaths there and just have a sense of landing. So I'm going to take you into a couple of pieces of yoga philosophy, and I'm going to try to then bring these into a really manageable, digestive meal that we can take and bring through our lives to feel like our muscle of mindfulness is stronger. So, first of all, this little cup, this is your bliss sheath. So if you imagine your bliss is your truth, your freedom. It's likely that state that you feel or long to feel when you're feeling grounded, stable, and centered. So that's your bliss sheath. I promise this is going to make sense. This is your intellect. Sits on top of your bliss. So where bliss is fed through meditation and the relaxation response, through finding and creating calm, your intellect is fed through study, through reason, and through information. Your mind. Here is your mind sheath. These are all sheaths. I'm just going to let Betsy in. Your mind, each one of these sheaths is fed on something. Your mind sheath is fed by sensory impressions. So what you take in through your eyes, your ears, your tongue, your nerve endings, all stimulated by the mind. Think of how a child wants to put everything in their mouth. Mind. Prana. This is your breath sheath. The breath sheath is fed by breath. How original. So the way you breathe stabilizes and feeds this sheath of you. Lastly, this is your body. So you've got your body sheath. Your body is fed by diet, exercise, medicinal herbs, things like that. So you look at these sheaths. It would be better if I had Russian nesting dolls, but I don't, so I use bowls from home instead. I want you to get to the third bowl, which is your mind, without touching the first two. How are you going to access your mind if you don't first talk to the body, talk to the breath? These sheaths and the care of these sheaths is really our main job in life. How we care for them affects each one in turn as they get more and more refined to that innermost bliss sheath. When I think of bliss, I don't think of a tiny shot glass like I have there. It's in fact the most expansive place, but it's hiding in the tiniest part of you. Let's leave the sheaths for one moment, and I'm going to come back to them. I want you to imagine that you're out at night, and it's warmer than 12 degrees, and it's a beautiful, clear night. The full moon is out. You're by a lake. So you're looking at the lake, and you can see the moon is perfectly reflected in the water. When I look into the lake, I can see to the very bottom of the lake. There's no waves at all, maybe the tiniest, slightest ripple because water moves, but generally it's just super clear. We call this state of clarity, we call it sattva. And don't worry about the names, but we call it sattva. And when someone's living in that kind of a state, what you see is what you get. There's a lot of truth to them. They're clear. It's evident, right? Where most of us live is actually when the waves start to pick up a little bit in the water. So it's a spectrum. It might be just a little bit of this that changes the texture of the reflection of the moon. It might be quite a lot of waves to the point where the bottom of the lake is less clear. I said that most of us live there because that's where we have more conflict and more attachment to conflict, more attachment to drama. So we create more waves through our attachment to different ideas. I hope that kind of makes sense to you, and I'll make it make more sense. But the last part of the spectrum is when the waves are so big that the bottom of the lake is actually being stirred up. So now you can't even see the moon. It's so stormy. You can't see to the bottom of the lake anymore. It's mucky. It's dark. Nothing to do. So in that state, tamas. So we've got tamas. Rajas is the waves, and then sattva. Think about these days in our world. Fairly easy to say that there's a whole bunch of tamasic going on right now. What is true? What is stable? What of the structures that you have formerly been familiar with, what of those is still standing? There is such a high degree of turbulence right now, uncertainty, fear-mongering, and fear messaging, that we are hopelessly on this boat in really, really strong, stormy waters. When you do your practices, like we took 5 minutes to do some neck circles, to do some body circles, to do our cat-cow movements, what that does, and when you breathe, what that does is it takes our boat and steadies it on the water. When you take your breath to that lower level in your lungs and down into your lower belly, you give yourself the wherewithal to steady your boat. I think of it a lot. When I was a kid, my sister and I would play in this park, and we'd go on the teeter-totters, and sometimes I would slam that teeter-totter down so hard that my sister would fly. I was trying to get her to fly off the teeter-totter, and then she would come crashing down and she'd try to knock me off the teeter-totter. That in and of itself is tamasic behavior. And you can see it in, pardon me for saying, but maybe certain leaders that are really just lunatics in leaders' clothing. They are creating such a high degree of disturbance that it's like we're on the teeter-totter, not really having power. There were other times where Joss and I, on our teeter-totters, we would try to hover. The fulcrum was here, and we would try to hover the teeter-totter. And to do that, we had to get really quiet. We had to, I don't like the word control, but we did have to control our body's movements. We had to get really steady in our presence with each other. In a sense, we were creating a sattvic place on that teeter-totter. When we do that, we take the power away from the disturbance. I practice every day. Generally, my practice, which I mean by that, I do journaling and breath and yoga. My practice might last 10 minutes some days, others it's an hour. But in that time, my mind is pulled out of the storm and into the clarity of sattva, because I've taken time for myself. It's the oxygen mask that you're meant to put on in the airplane first. During the rest of the day, I will be disrupted. I will, if I turn on the CBC enough times, I will get pulled back into the waves. But the more I practice, and by that I mean in the middle of the day when I feel myself getting up, I breathe, I remember, I bring myself back. The more times I do that, the more times I study the teeter-totter. So for me, that practice, whatever that is for you, whether it's meditation, whether it's taekwondo, whether it's walking, whether it's writing poetry, it's taking that time to remember you, which steadies your boat. None of that is easy, but it is necessary. A lot of people will say to me, well, when I'm a terrible meditator. That's the best line I get. I can't meditate. Well, I'm not very good at it either if it's about rating ourselves. So when I first started doing yoga about 25 years ago, I really had a hard time meditating because I couldn't be still. My mind was so busy and self-sabotaging. So the practice of yoga gave me something to hang my mind on. I hope that makes sense to you. So if I was in a stretch and I felt my bum really tight, then my bum would pull my busy mind into the present. And the present was, ow, my bum. Over the 25 years of a practice, sometimes very regular, sometimes fairly irregular, I've come to understand that mastery is not that I never get rocked again, but it's that I steady myself more and more frequently every day. And I might stay steady for longer each time, not because I'm perfect at it, but because my survival depends on it. So, of course, we're anxious. In fact, I know about maybe 10 years ago, the World Health Organization said that their biggest concern in terms of disease and especially emotional health was anxiety. And then I remember hearing from my uncle, who's a doctor, that their biggest concern on a physical level was autoimmune disorders, which is really about being so deeply stressed that the immune system begins to attack itself. We've been amping up for a long time, and it's going to take work for us to bring ourselves back to steady levels of being. This is going to take work. And the work is about a daily commitment to steady your boat. So the gunas, those that sattva and tamas and rajas and all that, that's all about the level of disruption that you actually do have a say in. There's a level of disruption in our world that you don't really have a say in, but your participation in it, you do have a say in. For example, you don't have to watch CNN or Fox News, and you certainly don't need to have them on all day long if you insist on watching them a little bit. So that's one way to study. So I want to say to you that your anxiety, if it's yours or if it's someone else's, is not your fault, and it's not because you're not showing up enough. It's not because you're not practicing enough. It's because you're sensitive, meaning you have senses. You have eyes and ears. You have a mind. You are relational. Every one of our cells is interconnected to every other cell. If one cell cuts itself off from the others, it will atrophy and die. So if you're a collection of a whole bunch of those cells, why would you be able to cut yourself off from what your other human beings are doing? So you're relational, you are sensitive, and you are alive in a time of extremely, extremely profound change on the earth. So let's put aside the self-blame part of it. Let's say to ourselves, of course I'm anxious. It just makes sense. Lately, because it's autumn, the wind picks up the leaves and the leaves are thrust upwards. That's anxiety. It's a wind that picks our thoughts up and sends them up instead of down. And down is where they need to go. So down is about your digestive fire and your ability to process. So I want to just say that you are here tonight means everything to me, because I think it's sacred. I think it's sacred whenever we choose to spend time together helping each other to live a better life. So you somehow found it within yourself to put 45 minutes aside for you tonight. Think of that anxiety as its own entity. So that entity wants to survive. So on those days where you try to do the practices we're going to talk about, your anxiety is going to say, don't listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And you should get on the computer or you should go look at social media because you might be missing something. That is a total lie. And more often than not, anxiety is lying and at least exaggerating the facts to you. Anxiety is creating its own alternate facts. What we need to remember is deep within those sheaths is our bliss, which is our truth. The truth is, you were able to do this tonight. So I think probably tomorrow you could find 5 minutes for you. And nobody is going to worry where you are. If they insist that it was wrong for you to take time for yourself, you might want to just ponder what's going on in that relationship. So I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really glad you're taking this time. I'm going to have a sip of tea. Blither blathering takes a lot of saliva. So here are your sheaths. In yoga, we call these koshas, Koshas. By the way, I am happy to share a really great meditation with you that I've done on a recording. I'm really happy to share a handout about that sattva, rajas, tamas, and I'm happy to share stuff about these. You just need to shoot me an email or send it to Jackie or Sharon and it'll come to me. Digression. Here's your body sheath. This is your outermost sheath, made of your muscles and your bones and your blood. It digests through what you eat, including medicinal herbs. It is made well through movement, plus what you take in. So, are you taking in things that are digestible to you? This is your first move toward mental health and well-being. So, you feed your body in a way that is digestible to it. Doesn't mean everyone becomes a vegan, by the way. It's figuring out what is digestible to you. Body sheath. The body and the mind, that's one sheath and the third sheath. The bridge between your body and your mind is your breath, because you can't get to your mind if you don't breathe. And do you find too, when I'm anxious, so my favorite time is approximately 2:35 a.m. when I am catapulted out of my body into my frenetic mind where I am barely breathing, and surely Chicken Little is correct that the sky is falling. The fastest way for me to get back to sleep is a breathing practice. What I like about counting on my breath, like actually counting on 1, on 2, or if you prefer rivers, Mississippi, the thing I love about it is it gives my mind something to hang on to. It gives my mind something to be calmed with. And remember that the longer you inhale, so I inhale to about 8, the more you access that parasympathetic system in your lower lungs. The longer you exhale longer than your inhale, the more you trigger the vagus nerve to send a serum into your body, which lowers your inflammation. How magical is that? That's your breath sheath. So your breath sheath digests or metabolizes breath through breathing practices. Diet and herbs, breath. Mind. This version of the mind is kind of childlike in that there's ignorance to it. Ignorance is not a negative word, it's a lack of knowing. This version of the mind can feel the pottery under my fingers, but this version of the mind doesn't necessarily visualize the potter at the wheel. I can just feel it. I might smell it. I might taste it. I can see it. This version of the mind is, or metabolizes, digests sensory input. So what are you feeding your senses? There's a lot of talk lately about letting your mind have quiet. So not constantly stimulating yourself with social media, phones, television, whatever it is, but letting your mind have quiet space and time. The other thing is to think about, is the food that I'm feeding my mind toxic or digestible? There are certain things that I feed my mind every day that are indigestible because I do want to stay slightly in tune with current events. But otherwise, I'd really like to give my sense organs digestible things. We're so lucky up here. We look outside, there's a beautiful forest, a tree, a river, a lake, whatever it is. We're really lucky. So remember to feed your senses good, healthy food. Okay, so body, digest diet through diet and herbs. Breath, bridges to the mind, sense organs. This is a higher state of mind. This is your intellect. Your intellect is stimulated and fed by study, by research, by thinking, by intellectualizing. This sheath needs to be able to discern. It needs to be able to ponder. And so if there's never any time for your mind to wander and for you to, like in the ancient scripts or ancient texts, they talk about this one being really helpful to study ancient philosophies and scriptures. But what are you letting your intellect experience these days? So that's Vijnanamaya kosha. That is your intellect. Finally, in the most refined place, you get your bliss sheath. Your bliss is called Anamaya kosha. Anandamaya kosha. I just got it wrong. Anandamaya kosha. This one is all about our connection to our deepest, wisest self. That part of us, if you are a spiritual person, you might call your soul, your God spark. For me, sometimes I'll call it my true nature. This true nature doesn't really change much. It's truth in and of itself. And if we spend all of our time whirling in the wind, we never get to experience the expansiveness of this bliss. So to get here, we need to be mindful of what we eat, how we breathe, what we take in through our senses, and how we process information. Do we give ourselves enough time to really think? I love this conversation lately around the importance of letting your mind wander, not to the deep, dark, anxious places of 2 a.m, but maybe sitting in the forest and thinking about the kind of world you want to invest in. So there's a very conscious choosing there in how you're investing. Your energy is not limitless. You're not a bottomless tank. So part of the discipline, because relaxation is not passive, it's a very active choice. The discipline is in saying, not now. Right now, I want to go sit with this tree. And the tree and I are going to think about how beautiful the world could get. I'm going to cut the food source off to those anxious thoughts, and I'm going to divert it toward thoughts of creation and creativity, imagination, connection. So we want to make sure that we slow down. We want to make sure that we do some kind of body movement that is slow and mindful, rhythmic, and ideally has some breathing part to it. We want to make sure we tune into the breath. The foods that we eat, let them be one ingredient whenever possible. Let them be fresh. Let them grow close to the ground, especially if we're feeling ungrounded. Oils. Oils are the most hydrating, medicinal things we have. Put them on your skin. Don't put moisturizer on. Put some sesame oil or some coconut oil. Put it in your food. Don't believe any of that hype around essential fats, making you put on weight. That's not at all what they do. They are detoxifying, they're hydrating. And more than anything, in that windy dryness of your anxious mind, oils act as love. And love is the antidote. Anxiety gets us stuck in what if, and love brings us into what is. It's not to say that what is happening in your world specifically and our world generally is okay with us, but we're here. And how do you want to be here? I know I need to tend the hull of my boat all the time if I am to get through this storm. And so the discipline is in making sure I do the practices that allow me to tend the hull. So I create routines. One of my routines is to make sure I practice. I do my breathing and I do my yoga. Other than that, I put cold water on my face. I brush my teeth, right? Things that are really normal. Routines create stability, and your whirling mind is trying really hard to destabilize you. So in the morning, do 3 things in the same order every day. It doesn't have to be more than that. Get your oils in. Get them on your skin. Get them in your food. Go in nature. Go for a walk. Remember what's real. Slow down. When you trigger your relaxation response, it is sleepifying. There's a study, or there was a documentary done about people in acute stages of disease processes, and they did their usual of, good food and exercise and good social network. But the other thing that really stunned me that they did is they made sure that every day they triggered their relaxation response. And that's where I'm more than happy to share a meditation tape with you if you want, or recording. You have to trigger your relaxation response and let nothing stand in your way. The thing about anxiety is because it's upward and it's drying and it's destabilizing, is it sets in motion a destabilization of your body sheath. You go through the levels of those sheaths and the body becomes more prone to injury, to illness, all the gamut. So to say every day, my priority is to trigger my relaxation response and tend the hull of my boat, it's massive. I wanted to bring in those sheaths because I wanted you to have a visual for the importance of whether or not you're taking in toxic material. It's not helping. And the impact of it, or the impact of doing the opposite, of taking in healing, taking in kindness, is in the end to tend your bliss sheath. The truth is that we all get sick. We all have expiry dates. to be born is to set in motion a process of body devolution. But what do you want to do along the way? How do you want to spend your time? Worrying about the inevitable, or sitting with a tree and being in the sacred moment of being with that tree, being with you, being with a loved one? So this is in your power. Doesn't mean you're not going to get anxious again. I'll text you at 2 a.m. We can meet there. But maybe you'll have a different vocabulary, more compassionate vocabulary, and some easy to access tools to just let you come down from that tree. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And I'm open to, lately I haven't been able to unmute mics like I used to be able to. But if you'd like to have a conversation, we still have some time. And I'd love to hear your voice. Just unmute and share if you want.
Allie,
Yeah.
it's Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Can you share with us, if we have our practice or our routine, we can find this place that you're discussing. But in the middle of the swirl, in the middle of the workday, in the middle of the diagnosis, in the middle of the kids to school, in the middle, what's the strategy to get there from there?
So that's fabulous. I think sometimes the strategy is to let yourself go completely out to sea. And then when you have the resources and the time, you bring yourself back. The other resource, as you grow in your practice and as your techniques deepen, is in the middle of going to get your kids, in the middle of frenzy, the breath might find you. So initially, Vanda, my teacher's teacher, would say, yoga, you have to practice it, you have to make it happen. But within a little short time, it will start to pull you by the hair. But you have to commit to practicing and learning how to use that tool. But forever, it's going to be like the other day, I got completely tousled by something for a few days, and it took me a long time to get back. But I have enough tools now that getting back wasn't as hard as it used to be. Does that help?
It does. Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Allie. It's Suzanne here.
Hi, Suzanne.
I was just going to suggest that sometimes it just takes. So I had a really bad year one year teaching. It was a very, very difficult time, and I had a colleague who gave me the whole episodes of the X-Files, which I had never watched. And the only way I could get to sleep at night was watching this really dumb TV program. But it brought my brain back to like, oh, okay, just shut it all down, watch something weird, and then so every now and then it's just something very strange that you just have to, like, I don't know why she thought I'd watch X-Files and that would help, but it did.
But it kind of takes you out of the hamster wheel, right?
Totally.
Like that was not part of your hamster
It's like,
wheel.
who are these people? Who's Mulder? What? Yeah, so I don't know. It's just like one of those things I go back to year after year because it saved my sanity.
I love it.
So I have a question. It's very specific to me, but other people might be going through this at some point.
Right.
I'm about to do hi. I'm about to do radiation, and while I'm on the table, I have to hold chest breaths, not belly breaths. So I got to do the big breathe in, hold, hold, hold. It's already an anxiety producing, thing to go through. What's something I can do during that moment when I can't do belly breaths? Any thoughts, any ideas?
So I've been trying this out lately. I've been extending my breath, which is making me slightly anxious at times. Like I'm holding it, but I'm doing it as, this is going to sound weird, but kind of as an experiment in dealing with anxiety. So when I'm holding and I start to feel like, I talk to myself like, you know what, you're going to breathe again. And I wonder too, Stacy, if the physiological is so deeply affected by your thoughts that I wonder if when you're breathing, you were saying to yourself, and I access my relaxation response. That even though you're not breathing right down to the belly, you're still creating, because action follows intention, right? So you create that intention not to go into fight or flight. And maybe it'll take a few to really get it, but I think it might be helpful to monitor your thoughts.
Thanks. I'll give it a try.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Stacy.
Can I suggest something, Stacy? I went through the same thing. And I know they were very kind enough in between taking shots that I said, I just need to breathe normally for a minute or two. Could you just give me a breath or two? And then they were like, okay, yeah, for sure. Because otherwise you're like, and it's just, it doesn't help, because then you start moving all over the place, which is not what they want. So I think I would just make a deal with the people there.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Suzanne.
And I think too that there's so much to be said for seeing the anxiety coming up and realizing that it's a lie, because you are going to breathe again. And so it's it's kind of a great experiment of, I'm not going to buy the lie.
Yeah, I don't get so much anxious about holding my breath. It's that I can't get into a belly breath, and that it's a completely anxious situation in general.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think Suzanne was spot on with that.
Yeah, thanks.
If there aren't
Can
any
I
more
make
questions,
one other suggestion for you, Stacy?
Please, yes.
Maybe just before going into radiation, I found for me, it was like, take those deep breaths so that you're coming in a place of calm, so that when you do have to hold your breath, you're a little bit more centered and a little bit more like, just take those like belly breaths before it begins. And then like Suzanne said, just, set the boundaries of, I just need to take a few breaths, and that might be helpful. And then maybe at the end again, so almost like bookmark it, of set yourself the intention that you're gonna do some nice belly breathing and just calm yourself before you go in. And then afterwards, even just to maybe help.
Thanks, Sam.
yeah, that's great, Sam. So are there any other questions? Stacy, thanks for being willing to be so vulnerable, by the way. So as I said, I did record this. And so if you, I don't know, if you want it for some reason, I'll have it for you. And if you want any kind of paper resources around what we've talked about with the sheaths or the Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, if you found any of that useful, I'm happy to share any and everything with you. And I also have some good short relaxation techniques that I use when I can't sleep at 2 a.m. If you want any of that, just send us an email, me or anyone at Enliven, and we'll get that to you. So I always end a practice, and I feel like this was a practice, by wishing all of you immense peace. And that doesn't mean lack of disruption, because we'll always be disrupted. But I wish for you peace on the water. And this little truth in me, this little bliss sheath in me, bows to the bliss sheath in you. So namaste.
Namaste.
I hope that this was helpful for you. I'd love to hear if it was. And if there are things that weren't, I'd love to hear, because I'm always learning and always wanting to grow. So let me know.
Thanks, Sally.
My
Thanks.
pleasure.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you, Ali.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Oh.